The distance didn't arrive like a storm. It drifted in like fog, soft and quiet, until every room felt dimmer than it used to be. Plates cooled on the table while the microwave blinked its steady green eye. She'd text that she'd eaten already, that she was tired, that tomorrow would be lighter than today. I believed it, because belief is what keeps a house from caving in until it. She started moving differently, like her body was learning a new language it didn't want me to hear. Shoulders turned slightly away, phone kept face down, the kind of small rehearsals that tell you the play is already underway. I asked if she was happy, and she said yes, too quickly, like a door clicked shut before it could be opened all the way. The hum of traffic slid along our windows at night. Even the city sounded like it was whispering about us. Empty dinners multiplied, leftovers in labeled containers, neat handwriting on masking tape, as if order could outtalk the silence. I noticed new perfumes, cleaner, sharper, scents that made our bedroom feel rented by a stranger. When I leaned in, she leaned back without moving, an optical illusion of marriage. The first real crack was banal, a recurring calendar block called Studio Night, something she never had before, wedged neatly between work and self-care. She said she was trying watercolors again, reclaiming the part of herself she had shelved, and I wanted that for her, wanted it so much I didn't ask why her brushes smelled like cologne when she came home. Love can be a gentleman that holds the door open for the very thing that breaks it. I started sleeping light, the kind of sleep that wakes at every footfall, every late-night shower, every whispering notification buried under a pillow. In the morning, she'd put her coffee cup right on the sunlight, as if warmth could be arranged, as if morning itself could be staged to feel honest. She smiled like someone who knew how to smile for photographs. No eyes, all teeth. The discovery, when it came, disguised itself as tidiness. A phone left unlocked on the counter while she took out the trash, a benign moment in a benign evening. I didn't want to be the man who looked. I wanted to be the man who trusted, but there is a point where trust becomes a fancy word for self-erasure. I tapped the screen, not to accuse, only to confirm the shape of the ache that had already moved. The messages were careful, like a pair of dancers who had rehearsed the steps until no one tripped anymore. Studio Night was a hotel, and color mixing was a room number, and love, some kind of love, was poured into a glass I didn't know we owned. He had a name that looked clean in sans serif, harmless at first glance, the kind of name you'd trust with your spare. They wrote like people who had rearranged the furniture of their guilt until it looked like a living room. My hands shook, but quietly, like leaves in a wind you can't see from the street. The kettle clicked off behind me, a small domestic mercy punctuating the end of us. I didn't scream. The room was already full of loud objects, the fridge's low engine, the radiator's cough, the city's breath at the window, and I couldn't add to it. I took a screenshot with a mind not my own, a slow-motion reflex, the way bodies remember bracing even after the car has stopped. Her footsteps came back down the hall, soft and ordinary, like ordinary could still save us. She saw the phone in my hand, read my face the way you read whether too late to change the plan, but just in time to grab a coat. Her mouth opened, but no words arrived. The alibi had been perfect until it needed to be true. "We can talk," she said, and the kettle ticked as it cooled, and everything waited for who would lie first. She reached for the phone, not gently, and said the name like a shield. In the same breath, a sharp knock at our door shattered the room, 3 fast raps, like urgency had come to collect its debt. The knock became a hinge in the night. Before it, there was one version of us. After it, there were boxes. She froze, eyes darting to the door, then to me, then to the phone, as if arranging blame in alphabetical order. I stepped past her and opened it on muscle memory, like greeting a neighbor, like any other. A man stood there, rain-stitching his coat to his shoulders, older than me by a few quiet years, a face built for apologies. He said my name with the careful cadence of someone who practiced, each syllable set down like fragile glass. "Private investigator," he added, almost apologetically, showing an ID that blurred in the hallway's weak light. "He wasn't my investigator. He belonged to the hotel's management," he said, "hired to look into a string of card fraud cases connected to a certain floor and a certain room, where a woman had been comped for art sessions that never existed, and a man whose receipts overlapped so neatly it looked like a spreadsheet's idea of love. He had traced names, timestamps, cameras that watched everything everywhere, except the thing that mattered. He didn't know he was collapsing my house. He thought he was closing a ledger, but his notes were immaculate. Dates that matched Studio Night, room key logs that told a clock's version of truth, faces caught sideways in reflective surfaces, proof made from corners and coincidences. He said her name, and the room held its breath. She stepped forward like someone rehearsing stepping forward. "I can explain," she tried, but the thing about explanation is that it arrives with its own weather system, and we were already drenched. He looked at the floor as if he'd walked in on a prayer. After he left, the apartment felt rearranged without moving a thing. Sleepless nights are not really nights, they're long windows where you watch your life from the sidewalk. The fridge hummed like a distant engine, carrying us to a city we didn't choose. I found traces, a second toothbrush in her tote, used then hidden, receipts smoothed flat like they could be ironed into innocence, perfume atomizers with names that sounded like fake alibis, haze, veil, whisper. In the laundry, a shirt with a button replaced by a different shade of blue, small things that felt like confessions with their hands in their pockets. Every drawer became an exhibit. Every song on the radio sounded like it knew something about us. Grief was not a tidy room, it was the whole building flickering, the elevator stopping between floors, the rain teaching the window how to say no. I tried resilience like a jacket, took walks until the rain felt less like punishment and more like weather. I ate breakfast at a counter alone and let the morning light put me back together in pieces, like stained glass chooses its own cathedral. I blocked his number I didn't have. I deleted a photo I never took. I stood in the shower until the steam turned me into a person with outlines again. I cleaned the stove at 1 a.m. because sometimes you make a surface shine just to prove you still can. When she slept on the couch, she folded the blanket carefully, ready for a court that would never convene. I called the pie the next day, not to ask for more, but to ask for less. He told me the investigation had begun as fraud and ended as pattern, the meticulousness of repetition, the rhythm of wrong. He said people keep time with the things they think they deserve. The turning point arrived on a quiet afternoon when the rain finally stopped and the city exhaled. I opened the window and let air into rooms that had been performing for too long. On the sill, there was a thin line of dust I'd never noticed, a horizon in miniature, and I wiped it away with my thumb like erasing a future I hadn't agreed. I stopped trying to decide if love had been real. Reality had been real enough. The other man was not a villain in my mind anymore. He was a room where she practiced being someone she could not be here. The grief loosened a notch, like a belt after a long. I packed a bag with ordinary things. Socks, shirts, a worn book that still smelled like a library, a photograph of us where the light did most of the work. When I zipped it, the sound felt like a verdict I could live with. I wrote a note that was not a goodbye, only a pause. I need air, please don't follow. That night the city felt newly mapped. Streets I'd walked for years became corridors in a house I no longer owned. In a diner, coffee tasted like a promise kept only to the tongue. I practiced saying my name to myself, out loud, until it felt accurate again. The door to the apartment wasn't locked when I returned for the last box. Inside, her phone lay face up on the table, screen lit, with a new message from him that began with my name. She came back on a Sunday evening, the kind of gray that teaches lamps how to be kind. She knocked with her own key in her hand, a gesture that said, I know better, and also, I'm afraid. I opened the door as if opening a window, careful of what the gust might take. She looked smaller, guilt shrinks people. I ended it, she said, and the words sat between us like wet coats. She cried the quiet kind, the practical kind, the kind that doesn't beg so much as surrender. We sat at the table that used to hold birthdays and takeout and Sunday crosswords we rarely finished. The apartment smelled like coffee and rain and something medicinal, like repairs. In the silence, the radiator clicked back to life, small applause for trying. I wanted to be new, she confessed, hands wrapped around a mug like it could read her fortune. With him, I felt edited, like someone had deleted my mistakes and left only the best lines. Her honesty landed like gentle hail, soft, but it rattled all the same. I asked the questions I could survive. When did it start? When did you know? When did you stop knowing me? She answered in slow beads, not to torture me but to keep us from drowning. Truth has to be measured out, or it refuses to. We did not argue. Arguing felt like a luxury we had not earned. We listened for the city and let it translate what we couldn't say. Car tires making small rivers on the street, a neighbor's laughter traveling up the stairwell, a distant siren that did not belong to us. Sometimes the best words are other people's noises. I told her about the pie, about the ledger-turned lantern, about the notes that made a map of nights I'd slept inside a mistake. She said she'd never meant to be careful. She'd only meant to be loved. I remembered her in our early years, a light on a morning no one had deserved, and grief stood up to leave, then sat down again. There was dignity to keep, and it wasn't a shared coat. Each of us had to hang our own. She asked if I hated her, and the truth was complicated. Hate is a clean fire, and I was a damp wood that smoked and wouldn't catch. I don't know, I said, which was kinder than a lie. We spoke about the other man like you talk about bad weather, how long it lasted, what it damaged, whether it would return. She said he made her feel seen. I said I had been looking at her the whole time. The kitchen light flickered, no drama, just electricity making up its mind. When she reached for my hand, I did not pull away. I also did not move closer. She understood, which hurt in a new, purer way. People say closure is a door. It's more like a window you learn how to open without. We didn't decide anything that night, because decisions are books you shouldn't skim. She took the bedroom, I took the couch. The apartment drew a line we didn't argue with. The rain returned, as if practicing a role it knew by heart. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of her packing a small bag, slowly, tenderly, as if not to wake the past. She stood in the hallway with her shoes in her hands, looking at me like a question she finally knew how to ask. "If I go now, will it hurt less?" she whispered. I nodded without nodding, and she set the bag down anyway. Then my phone lit the dark with a new voicemail. Unknown number, his voice, steady and regretful, saying he needed to tell me one last thing. Morning arrived like a careful apology, thin light, no sudden moves. The voicemail waited between us on the coffee table, a small square of threat and mercy. I pressed play and let a stranger's voice teach me the last of my life with her. He sounded tired in the honorable way, the way people sound when they finally put down something heavy they shouldn't have picked up. He said he hadn't known my name at first, then he knew it too often. He said she had told him she couldn't be the person he kept seeing. She was trying to return what she'd borrowed. He apologized without flourish, a plain apology set on an ordinary plate. He said he loved her, and also that he wouldn't call again. The line ended like a door that closes softly and somehow shakes the house. We made eggs we did not eat. The chairs looked accusing in their emptiness. Every empty chair is a sermon about presence. I washed the pan and watched the water make small, bright cities on the metal. She asked if we could try counseling, try beginning again, try living with more windows and fewer walls. I wanted to want that. Wanting can be a beautiful lie if you hold it close enough. But the morning made everything honest, light sneaking under the door, revealing what the night lets you dream. Forgiveness arrived like weather, not a plan. It touched my shoulder and moved on. I told her that I forgave her, which is not the same as keeping her. Her face broke in a quiet way that will live in the soft part of me where names go to rest. We divided the house the way you divide a story. What belongs to the beginning, what stays with the end. She took the plant that always leaned toward the window. I kept the books that smelled like summers we had spent reading more than talking. The framed photo on the shelf bent the light just so, two people held together by a lens and a sun that had done its best. There were signatures and keys, logistics that make heartbreak feel bureaucratic. She held the door like it held a different life open, and for once we didn't rush anything. Outside, the street shone from last night's rain, clean and temporary. After she left, the apartment exhaled and sounded larger. The empty rooms did their work, teaching me their vocabulary: solitude, echo, mercy. I brewed coffee and let the smell climb the morning like a steady thought. I called the pie to close the loop. He thanked me for my kindness, which felt like a thing borrowed from someone better. He told me endings are just places where breath gathers before the next sentence. I wrote that down and taped it to the fridge, a permission slip for later. By noon, the light had committed, and the city had found its ordinary traffic again. I opened the window and listened, not for her footsteps, not for his voice, just for the sound of being in a room that no longer lied to me. The chair across from me was empty, and that felt like the truth behaving itself. I didn't plot a future, I mended a present. There are gestures you save for yourself. The careful folding of a shirt, the rinsing of a cup, the way you place a book down as if it could bruise. I practiced speaking gently to the mirror, like meeting a friend at the station who arrived on time. The letting go was not dramatic, it was exact. I stood in the doorway, held the frame, and allowed the morning to do what mornings do: carry forward what can be carried, set down what cannot. When the light touched the table where her phone had lit the dark, it found nothing there and called it peace. Quiet endings. I turned off the kettle before it clicked on and sat in the stillness, counting the soft sounds of a life that somehow still fit me. A life that somehow still fit me.